Welcome to everyone that's in the room here in Guildhall with us, and also to everybody that's joining us online. Today's meeting is the Agile Working Scrutiny Working Group. I know that we have at least one apology for absence, and that's from the co-opted member, which is Beth Allender, isn't it? Do we have any others?
No further apologies, Chair.
And I believe that Councillor Andrew O'Connor may be joining us from 5 o'clock onwards. So the first one I wanted to cover then is disclosures and of any personal or prejudicial interest. Has anybody got any of those? Nope. Okay. Just to remind everybody that there's a prohibition on whip votes and declaration of party whips for a meeting of this nature. Okay. We haven't received any public questions. So if I can introduce the people who've joined us in the room, and that is Councillor Dye or David Hopkins, who's Cabinet Member for Corporate Services and Performance. And is also Rachel Davis, who's the head of HR and the Service Centre, who will be presenting a report for us. So, Dye, do you want to make any opening remarks?
Yeah, I got no intention of doing much other than saying when we are introducing the report, this Agile Working, and I've been working with us a long time. And to start this well before COVID. Actually, if you look at where we were before COVID, I think we were very, very fortunate that how prepared we were, how we got us through that pandemic. In reality, I think it's a journey we've been on for many, many years. It's not something that's just happened. And I think it just shows the value that it brought to us, particularly, Agile Working's work tonight. We got Jeff Bacon, particularly, who was smothering with a cold. And I certainly didn't want him sitting alongside me. So it works in many ways. So I got nothing to add to the report. The report has been circulated. I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. And good afternoon to Jeff as well. I can see him on screen there. I believe he will maybe pick up some questions after Rachel's given her report in the relevant areas. So without any more ado, if I can hand over to Rachel, and if there's any key points you want to draw out the report that's been circulated before the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to follow on from the Deputy Leader's comments, agile or hybrid working, as we are calling it at the moment, is not new to the Council. Even when the COVID pandemic hit, there were pilots going on in various areas across the Council to test out the concept and the thinking. And yes, the learning from that pilot was incredibly important when we did then go into that lockdown period and working remotely became a requirement for all non-essential services. So coming out of that, in October 22, Cabinet approved a set of principles. I think it's really important to note that the principles that are contained within the document, starting from paragraph 10, cover off most of the areas of the questions that committee have put forward. And I think it's important to note that appropriate performance management mechanisms, desk space for individuals, the needs of individual employees, depending on, for example, a long-term health condition or a disability that they may have, balancing their home life with their work life is really important, that we have a set framework with which managers and leaders are expected to offer their operational service. So at that time, at the end of 22, each head of service was required to complete an operational model, primarily based, of course, on the needs of customers and residents of Swansea, with evidence to demonstrate how they were going to adhere to the principles for the workforce to have clarity around the expectation of either attending a building or working remotely. You have had an example included within the report for building services. I do have copies of all of them. They were all submitted to myself, and CMT then reviewed them all when they first came in. So if you have a specific question, I should be able to answer that about a service area. And then 12 months after setting those principles and each head of service writing up their proposal on how their operation would work, a review was conducted, and the questions that were posed as part of that review were included within the body of the report at paragraph 12. And we concluded at that time that the arrangements were working effectively, and that there'd been a range of different types of questions around the impact on staff, customers, etc. as a result 12 months on. And effective working arrangements seem to be confirmed by all. So also having then surveyed the workforce specifically to gain their views, you'll see paragraphs 18 and 19 talk about employee feedback and how they interact with their manager, how they receive information about developments in the council. And the response rates were notably high on those questions, whilst the overall level was in line with where you'd expect staff surveys to be. The response rates showed that people felt engaged with their manager, with their teams, and that it didn't raise any concerns for us as either an HR function or a leadership group around how those relationships were being managed. The big question is around council performance, I suppose, and has performance deteriorated as a result of hybrid working? But the measures remain high, KPIs remain achieved, and notably 90% of all of our audits come out high or substantial, which shows that there is confidence and assurance that the council is delivering its services in an effective way. When we look at customer complaints around anecdotal information not being able to get hold of officers, or there being delays in response times from various departments, our overall number of complaints shows that contact, specifically around complaints, is 2%. It's very, very small as a overall proportion of complaints about the way that the council works. And the departments that generally are named within those complaints, whilst not listed in the report, are in very frontline facing services, as you would perhaps expect. So things that residents and customers can touch and feel and see. Waste and cleansing, for example. Environmental health and housing. So those areas do have a high proportion of the 2% of complaints that we receive. And as I say, most of those staff are working from a site, from a location, and they are out and about. They are not hybrid workers. Jeff may want to comment momentarily on the impact of hybrid working on the accommodation strategy. But then I can perhaps turn to the questions that you specifically asked and go through our response to those.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, would you like to come in on that?
I will do, and at the same time, I'll probably answer the specific query you raised, Chair, about accommodation strategy, and I'll go on and probably quite a rambling journey about how we've got to where we have got to with regards to accommodation. But the accommodation strategy itself has been a piece of work that's been going on for probably nigh on 10 years, and some of you may recall the fact that not that long ago, within that 10-year period, we had offices in Pentlegare, we had 5 floors of offices in Oldway, we had local offices for social services in Gorseinon, Morriston, the Enterprise Park, and other pockets of accommodation scattered around the city. We set out to rationalise our office accommodation based on what was previously referred to in terms of sort of an agile hybrid strategy that was before the pandemic. So we were ahead of our time. We won a number of awards from the property side because we've done what we've done, because it was a self-funding strategy born out of the savings we made on a revenue and capital basis to rationalise those assets. The final stages of that accommodation strategy are coming to us now. It'll be evident to all of you that the Civic Centre is pretty much empty. Other than library, contact centre, and some back office accommodation for Revs and Bens and commercial services. Once Estorva is completed, and we're expecting practical completion in September with an opening in October of this year, the front of house elements of Civic Centre will be vacated. So that's effectively the contact centre, libraries, and I think that's basically it. Sorry, so that will basically be going into our Estorva development, along with our archives. That's the other bit I missed. Sorry, and Family History Centre that'll be going into the top floor. So that's the front of house element of the Civic Centre. At that point, it's effectively closed to members of the public. The back office is intended to move into this public sector hub that's been talked about for quite some time. Ostensibly, that's going to be a 5-storey office development in the city centre. Of the 4 floors of offices, first, second, third, fourth floor, Swansea Council will take 1 floor, 800 square metres or so, and it'll be exclusively for use of revenue and benefits. There'll be 100 workstations on that floor of offices, and at that point, the accommodation strategy is done and delivered. There will be office accommodation, small amounts of touchdown office accommodation in Estorva, but every other back office team will be based in the Guildhall. At the moment, there are 2,300 full-time equivalents located in the Guildhall out of approximately 900 workstations. Again, it'll be evident to all, it's not fully occupied because teams work in a slightly different way. The likes of revenue and benefits, for example, will be going into that back office in the public sector hub. They work on something like a 3-to-2 ratio, 60% occupancy. Occupancy levels we're seeing in the Guildhall at the moment are nearer 25 to 30%. And you have peaks and troughs. You may have higher figures during the middle of the week. That tends to be the norm. Beginning or end of the week, it's obviously slightly quieter. So that gives us the opportunity to to relocate more staff, more teams into the Guildhall. We were previously intending to locate my team, commercial services, Revs and Bens, as I've already mentioned, which are going to relocate, and planning into that public sector hub. So we were going to take 2 floors. We've reduced that to 1. We think we can. We don't think we know we can relocate everyone exclusively into the Guildhall. So we're making an immediate saving by rationalising to the point of having a presence in the city centre, but only to meet the needs of a full office accommodation strategy against a number of staff in the council structure that hasn't changed dramatically, quite frankly, over the last 10 years or so. So that's a short whistle-stop tour of the accommodation strategy. As I say, coming to its final stages, being monitored and reviewed throughout to make sure we are maximising the best use of our assets, to the point where, as I said, the final decision was the fact we were going to go now from 2 floors to 1. That's going to save the council probably another £250,000-300,000. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. That sort of goes in part, obviously, to answering the first question we got on our list here, which is regarding the accommodation strategy. Could we have clarity on the plans going forward? And Jeff's just given us part of that about the building of the new council offices. What I was hoping to do is if we could go through the questions which are here, and also I know that Councillor Jeff Jones has got some questions as well that we would like to pick in. Just to follow up on that, Jeff Bacon, this is. I know 10, 15 years ago, we were sat around the table looking at this, and obviously great progress has been made in reducing the estate down into a sort of more manageable amount, considering the requirements or needs. My understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that at the moment, the Guildhall, even at the biggest use at the moment, or the highest usage, is about a quarter used.
Average usage is about 25%, 25 to 30%.
Around quarter. So the legacy remaining teams over in the Civic Centre could quite easily fit in here. My concern is, and because I just need a little bit of clarity about this, is with the new public sector hub, I imagined or envisaged maybe a sort of contacted kind of customer contact kind of element to that. I know that's probably going in Estorva to a degree. Why would we be looking at city centre accommodation for what would be back of house people, which we could probably find more effective and cheap accommodation elsewhere? I just want. Councillor Hopkins is here in the room. He's put a hand up. I'll let him answer that.
I think we made it quite clear politically that we always want to get more people working and living in the city centre, and I think that is a political aim, that we want to see more people working in the city where they don't spend locally. They live. We see a lot of investment going into above the shops, getting people living in the city centre, and it has always been an aim. I know the leader have always said that he wants to get people living and working in the city centre. So it is about taking our services closer to the people and being in the city so that they will be available. Once we entered into the partnership with Urban Splash and we considered what to do with the Civic Centre, it was all about getting them away from the seafront into the city to make services more, what I would say, accessible to our customers.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Member. In terms of the number of people that would take up the 800 square metres, I think you said, was it?
800 square metres, yeah.
Yeah. Would they physically be able to make it into the Guildhall? Or do we still need accommodation beyond what the Guildhall can give?
For a number of reasons, they wouldn't. I mean, taking Councillor Hopkins' point, there is undoubtedly an investment economic regeneration aspect to this. And so there is a piece about, if the council haven't got faith in its own city, then who has? But it doesn't mean to say that we would build a building of 4 floors opposite and take the lot, because that would look odd, because it wouldn't be fully occupied. So we have taken the needs down to the barest minimum. You only get 100 workstations at 800 square meters because of the way it's developed and because of fire regs and the like. So that's exclusively for Revs and Bens, who would occupy on a quite intensive basis. They would need 100 desks, and they would need training space, and they would need identified space specifically for themselves. It wouldn't be possible to find that space exclusively within the Guildhall, the way the building's set up. And if you were going to isolate any other team from it, so it could only be revs and bends, you'd lose the flexibility that you would create in that facility. Because we've got 2,300 staff based out of the building, that shows the level of occupancy that you've got on a straight percentage basis. By moving more teams in, which includes planning and regen, my team, for example, IT and commercial services, you're maximising that density still further. I think there is a general creep back into the office. I imagine by the time you get to the point of having all those teams in, with a continual period of review, there may be the opportunity to rationalise still further and look at working with other partner organisations. But what we mustn't do, and what we've been the indications we're getting from our teams and other authorities, is drive it too hard to the point where it's difficult to row it back. The flexibility is there. You will have peaks, as I said earlier on, during the course of the week, where it may be that to have too much occupation or too many teams based out of the Guildhall would mean it would be impossible to function. It becomes less flexible for teams. I think we're at the point where we're maximising by pushing it as hard as we have done, and probably more so than any authority I can think of, to be honest with you. But we are taking the barest minimum in the public sector hub, and it's for that one dedicated team. And the fact they're in the city centre helps tremendously when it comes to linking it into any support that may be needed in a Storver, which, just to be clear, is the only front of house element of the authority in terms of delivery of service. There'll be no public access into the public sector hub at all. It's purely back office.
Thank you, Jeff. That's great for those clarifications. Rachel, would you like to start looking at some of these other questions? Do you want me to go through them, or would you like to just respond to the ones that have been provided?
I'm happy to just recap what they are for the benefit of everyone and then provide the answer if that's
that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, question 2 then is around the report states several departments are split with a 2-day in the office, 3-day hybrid. Are there plans to increase that to more days in the office, or will this stay static? The response to this question is around, I guess, the changing needs of customers, residents and departments. If, for example, there was a specific piece of equipment that had to be used in a building, then clearly that can't be done from home, and we would need staff to attend a workplace to carry out duties. So I imagine that it will stay pretty static, but we've been very clear in the principles that both the council and each individual employee needs to be mindful that flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances is always going to be a requirement. So what a current position is today may not be the situation in the future, and it's really important that everybody understands we have to adapt to changing needs.
Just in relation to that one, are you concerned, or is there any concern about custom and practice? Once people start to do things, that it's going to be harder to change?
No, so our contractual arrangements with our workforce allocate a workplace to each individual. So, my place of work is the Guildhall. I am able to work in a hybrid way because of the nature of my role, but I understand that there are a list of requirements and reasons whereby I might be needed to come to the building. Again, those are set out in some of our operational models. So, for example, in mine, I list all the things that I would expect people to be coming into work for if they are not already on a fixed pattern. A number of my teams do come in on a fixed pattern, particularly around payroll and recruitment. But it might be things like supporting staff during the induction period, helping new starters learn and develop when they're new to role. It might be around meetings such as this. It might be around political meetings. It might be, senior management groups. There are a range of examples that we put in our operational model to say these are the situations whereby you are required to come in, on top of, balancing your individual preference as well. Shall I move on to the next one? So question.
Sorry, Stuart, can I ask,
Sorry, Jeff, of course.
Yeah, you said with regard the terms of employment, are all employees actually going to be under that sort of guise that things could change? Or if they, if it's defined that they would perhaps initially work from home, are they aware that that could change at any time?
Yes, they are. So our contracts state that the default position is that you have a work location, not that you are working in a hybrid way and you will always be able to work from home, as an example. So you will be given a work location, and we record that on our HR payroll system as well. So it's more like the default is that you have a workplace and you are able to work in a hybrid way because we are flexible. But But again, as I say, in our operational models, we're very clear to say that that could adapt and change, and we need flexibility of the workforce as and when required.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to follow up on that, am I right to think that under legislation, the principal place of work is a term and condition that has to be mentioned in a contract, isn't it?
Yes. The next question was around safeguarding and welfare measures. So has the council considered safeguarding and welfare measures for when staff are working from home, for instance, the risk from abusive and controlling behaviours? Yes, the last item on our list of principles within the report takes account of personal circumstances, and adapting to hybrid working to support staff wherever it's needed should be considered. And we specifically mention domestic violence within the home if that's potentially a safeguarding concern. If somebody needs to come to a workplace every day because either their personal safety is at compromise by not coming in, or potentially they don't have a suitable working environment at home, which is also an important consideration for us, i.e. confidentiality of the space you're working in, the actual physical space that you're working in as well, then we should be able to accommodate that. And we should have flexibility within our allocated space to be able to flex that to meet those individual needs.
That's great. Thank you.
Next question is around what assessments are used to evaluate the safety of home working, for instance, display screen equipment assessments. So we have an online DSE assessment, which is delivered by e-learning. So it's accessible remotely. It's a mandatory e-learning course, so everyone is required to undertake it. We are able to report on take-up and compliance levels across directorates through their PFM DMT meetings. And as I say, it's mandatory. Everyone's expected to complete it. It's a 3-yearly refresher. So yes, it's fully accessible remotely because it's an e-learning module.
Thank you.
The next question is around customer satisfaction. Are there plans to gather evidence of customer satisfaction? And this relates to the anecdotal evidence received from the public to council suggests it's difficult to get hold of named officers. I've mentioned earlier that the data we hold in relation to customer complaints should come through the corporate complaints process so that we can log and monitor and then take action according to what is coming in on a factual evidence basis. The challenge with anecdotal information is that that can be missed, and we're not able to fully explore anecdotal information. So anything that is a concern on customer contact should really come through the corporate complaints procedure so we are able to monitor the actual level of concern and what was not being delivered to that individual at that time. As outlined in the report, there are a low number of complaints regarding contact with officers, and they are in areas that have far higher numbers of employees working on site or at a work location, such as waste and cleansing, public health, housing, etc. So I would suggest potentially that issues with contact with officers is potentially due to other reasons than hybrid working. So potentially phone numbers not being publicised correctly or opening hours not having been updated as to when those telephone lines are available. So I would suggest there's potentially a comms issue if that is the case, rather than the fact that hybrid working is taking place.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a difficult question to place and to answer because you're right. The corporate complaints, if you look at those, they haven't really increased. You hear lots of anecdotes, but it's very difficult to deal with an anecdote, isn't it? Because you don't really see it. I think sometimes what we probably have to remember as well is that you have to be really potentially incensed to make a complaint, but you can be mildly discomforted and never make a complaint about something. So it's trying to monitor customer satisfaction in certain departments at a more detailed level, perhaps.
Thank you. So the next question is around feedback. Has there been any, and has it demonstrated an effects for employees missing or requesting more face-to-face contact, and the risk around staff losing touch with requirements of a working environment, particularly new staff? And yes, the hybrid working principles, again covered within the report, require new staff to be effectively supported by both colleagues and managers. The templates that have been completed and submitted by each service area gives examples on how this will be done and sets the expectation. Most departments, for example, arrange face-to-face development days throughout the year where all team members are required to attend. And whilst there is a personal choice to a degree, as I said, around the safeguarding question, employees who have a preference to be in work in a building more frequently should be accommodated as far as possible, and their individual needs should be met.
Yeah, I think the reason for me asking this question is more about the sense of belonging to the council, or certainly new members of staff when they start. And I've worked with a lot of young graduates over the years, and it's a sense of setting a work expectation. They require more support and assistance, perhaps, than other people, and certainly young employees or people that change roles or jobs. And it's that kind of pastoral role that a manager or a line manager might have, which I think is potentially missing within a hybrid environment. There was lots of small studies or articles in newspapers during the pandemic and just afterwards about how difficult it was for certain youngsters, especially to start into work. So it's just being aware of that. I'm not necessarily saying it's a negative, but it's something that, what do we do to maybe help some line managers or managers with coaching or mentoring of younger or newer staff?
Yes, sorry, I should have said, Chair. One of the things that we've done to try and improve that position is we've created a new induction process for new starters, and it's due to launch in February. So in a couple of weeks, we will have a brand new offering for new starters to, as you say, talk about culture, feel, values, expectations, etc. And there'll be a mixture of online, hybrid, face-to-face type of content as well for all of the different types of modules we're looking to roll out as part of that corporate induction.
That's great. Thank you.
The next question is regarding the working example that was provided, and that building services are out on site a lot. Are there other examples? Yes, I've got copies of all of the other departments. If you'd like me to send a flavour of a couple of others to you after this meeting, yeah, I'm happy to do so for you to have a peruse through.
I think that would be really useful, certainly in areas where hybrid working is more common practice. It may be you'd think of more administrative areas perhaps that would have that more. Okay, great, thank you.
The next question says, hybrid working is a positive model and does seem to be working. The challenge is making sure things aren't missed. Are there any situations where staff do not have the option to work in the office and must work from home? I'm not aware of any situations where an employee has been directed to work at home other than in an office, other than obviously the national lockdown periods during COVID. And as I've said earlier, it's the same as the reverse of that. Our stance should be to support staff to attend a building if they wish, and if it's obviously in their personal interests to do so, particularly those who have that difficult home working environment where the space or the setup or the personal circumstances are not suited to home working. But I'm not aware of anyone who's been told that they cannot come to an office.
Leslie, is there anything you'd like to follow up on that one?
No, that's fine, Chair.
The next question was, are different departments able to develop their own agile working plan within the current strategy? Yes, providing that they have documented their arrangements to ensure that their service delivery is still appropriate. Then they have flexibility to operate in the way that suits their customers the best. For example, most finance teams are in on that 2-day, 3-day split, and it's quite fixed. My HR team is more remote than that, and they attend on a needs basis whereby they have to meet with employees, trade unions, managers, etc. So there's already flexibility with how the individual service areas work. And if they wanted to then deviate or flex from that again, then providing that they can evidence the rationale for it and how it's going to benefit, then yes, that would be acceptable.
So, okay, Leslie?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good to hear, because that's exactly how I think it should work. I think agile working is the way to go, but you have got to have that flexibility so different departments can make use of it the best way that suits both them and whoever they're dealing with. So yeah, thanks.
I think the next question is quite similar around flexibility within the current strategy to modify temporarily or on a permanent basis. And as I said at the outset, all of our arrangements have to be adaptable and flexible. It's really important that we understand and accept things change. We have to bend to those changes, and we need a workforce that's happy and prepared to do that when required. So nothing would be absolutely fixed. Okay. The next question is around the staff survey. It would be useful to target departments with a known higher volume of staff working from home to get more responses in this area. Staff surveys are very difficult to get high returns of feedback on. Our response rate was in line with what you'd expect. I know it sounds low to say that 30% response rate is about industry average, but it is. So we're trying a range of different approaches to get more feedback. And for example, my director in corporate services has arranged individual service area meetings throughout the end of January, beginning of February, to be able to gain the views of all members of staff within her directorate to specifically talk about how we can engage, particularly in a hybrid way, with corporate services being back office in the main, and to talk about the staff survey action plan that we will be putting together. So we know that there's lots of different ways to seek views of the workforce, and we do need to consider how we can improve and build upon that to compensate for what might be seen as low response rates. The questions that were asked as part of that survey around how staff feel about working in a hybrid way, bearing in mind half of the response rates were from hybrid workers, were very positive. We had 90% plus people saying that they have regular team meetings and that they are able to access support from their line manager in a timely way. So we don't have a concern based on the numbers from the staff survey about what was coming back, but there's always more that we can do to improve response rates.
Sorry, the only question that I had is on, I think it's page 6 of the report, number 20, you talk about a meeting being planned in January 25 with the trade unions to discuss what might be practical for fixed base workers. My question is have you had that and how did it go?
We haven't had it yet, I'm afraid, no. But it is very much planned and in the diary. It's something that they have been asking us for. They say it's all well and good talking about hybrid workers who have lots of flexibility, which is true, but actually what is there that's creative that we can do for improving the situation for very fixed base shift, particularly workers? I don't know that there will necessarily be an answer to that, but I think it's important that we recognise having the conversation is really, really important. And if there are other things that the trade unions do want to put across, then of course it would be responsible for us to consider them at least without dismissing out of hand. So no, we haven't had it yet, but we will be shortly. Okay, then we have a question around being managed. So do staff feel supported by someone working in a hybrid way? Does this lead to stress or concerns? And if it's not raised in one-to-ones and appraisals are happening online rather than face-to-face. So I've talked about the percentage of the responses from the staff survey. I would say that the performance management system that we have, which is online, it requires a meeting to take place in order to complete that process. So you have to enter the date that you met with the employee within the system in order for it to log that you have completed an appraisal. Now that meeting could be in person. It could be on Teams, where at least you have the visual interaction between both manager and employee, but it will not let you submit an appraisal just via email and written documentation. It is mandatory for there to be a meeting that takes place. So I hope that kind of assures that the performance management, the one-to-ones are meetings, whether in person or visual, and then the process is completed following that.
Sandra, you got any follow up on that? I've got a couple of questions related to that, if I may. One of the areas I think that's important when you're dealing with hybrid working is that you may well have, and it'd be suitable for more senior staff to be working hybridly at home, perhaps, or away from the work setting, whereas other members of staff in their teams are working out and about physically in a place. Have we seen in any of the operational plans any creative ways or any ways of making sure that people remain on site or in touch with their sort of workers who are on site, practically doing work out and about around the city? So, for example, I don't know, be it going to the park or going to wherever the work site is, to make sure that that kind of level of sort of understanding is still there and the connection between the parts of the organisation.
Sure, apologies, Chair. I did miss out a question there. I went straight to the last one, didn't I? I am sorry. That was the question above, number 15. I would say that in the vast majority of cases, I would expect managers of frontline staff to be operating in the same way that their frontline staff are. There will be geographical implications. You know, some will have to cover an area for where they may have dispersed staff in multiple sites, so they can't obviously be everywhere at the same time. And that would have been the same prior to having any hybrid working arrangements in place as well. We have a whole range of tools whereby managers can ensure that people who are out at sites or in fixed work locations are engaged. Toolbox talks are really popular, and it would be, yes, the responsibility for each department, wherever they're based, to ensure that those managers are getting coverage of each of the teams that they are responsible for. I wouldn't think that that's because managers are working in a hybrid way necessarily. I think it's just because the teams that they manage are dispersed by the very nature of the roles that they do.
Okay, thank you. I think we've come to the end of our written questions here, but I know that Councillor Jeff Jones has got a number of questions that you'd like to raise. Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, sorry, I submitted these a little bit late. We've gone over, quite a few of the points, and I must admit, I watched a television program. Not that I watch television much in the day, which is the Panorama program, which is actually on tonight, and that's extremely interesting. It's actually, covering this subject, so I recommend people to actually look at that. Perhaps we can all learn something by it. Anyway, the first thing I've actually got, has there been any measure concerning the loss or improvement of productivity by staff working from home? I know it's very difficult really for us to perhaps measure it, but I know you actually mentioned KPIs and so on, but has there any measures actually been carried out to see if productivity has actually gone up or down?
Other than key performance indicators, which are the best measure, sometimes it can be seen as very arbitrary and subjective. So if I give an example in my own area, so accounts payable and purchasing team, very much back office, they are responsible for processing invoices to suppliers so that we can ensure suppliers in Swansea and wider afield are getting paid promptly and within the timescales that are set out within our contract terms. So we have a KPI of 95% of all invoices should be paid within the terms, and that KPI is hit, sometimes exceeded, and those staff are probably the most hybrid team that I have within my area. So I would say that it's important that KPIs are used as the performance measure for productivity, as opposed to perhaps a feeling. And some will have very easy targets in that way. It's quite straightforward to know number of invoices paid. It's straightforward. Something else like HR and OD within my service would be more challenging because the very nature of the work they do is advisory. It's not processing transactions, for example. But overall, council performance, which is reported quarterly, hasn't raised any concerns around productivity as part of the formal reporting mechanism as a result of hybrid working.
Okay, thanks.
If I can just bring Jeff in as well, that's Jeff Bacon.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks to my namesake. Spelled with a J though, spelled wrong. Could I wouldn't mind answering that myself from the operational or also from the property perspective. From an operational perspective, quite often it's asked of me, have we gone too far with agile working? How can you tell if people are more productive or not? As Rachel said exactly then, it's about our wider KPIs. If there was a significant drop in terms of our performance because staff were working remotely and no one knew what they were doing, then there'll be a problem, but there hasn't been. In actual fact, if you're keeping the same levels and you have less assets, that must be a positive. But coming at it from my own personal perspective, and I'm sure a lot of us would probably be up the same thing. The amount of meetings we attend, some may not think they're productive, but the meetings we attend have gone up dramatically just because the ability to work in a hybrid manner, an agile manner, means that you can have back-to-back meetings all day, which is horrific, but that's just the way we tend to be. And on top of that, I had a regional meeting this morning with colleagues from East Talbot, Pembrokeshire, and Carmarthen. And before the pandemic and before Agile working, that would have been face to face. It would have been in one of those authorities' offices. So that would have been me out for most of the day. So that's a very good and obvious example. It's more than anecdotal. The fact that those sorts of meetings that previously would have taken months and months to arrange, it would have taken many highly paid members of staff out for a whole day, happen for an hour or two. And that's an obvious one that I think we probably sometimes miss. It's something where the productivity is increased massively. And when I can tell you now for a fact, when I go into the office, I'm a lot less productive because people stop and talk to me when I'm walking down the corridor, which they wouldn't normally do because they can speak to me whenever they want. They just say, Jeff, are you free? And they will phone me and I have a chat. Otherwise, you have that all the time and it's much, much less productive. It doesn't happen at home, but it certainly happens in the office. So there's some anecdotal and some real stuff there.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks for that.
Particularly being distracted by all them councillors that might be walking up the corridor as well, Jeff.
Oh, that's one of the greatest benefits, Councillor Hopkins, is that we don't get bothered by councillors.
Yeah, I refer back to that panorama programme. It actually covers that sort of area, you know. Now, on the report, I actually read a 30% figure of staff working from home. I think the Welsh Government have perhaps indicated, or I may have got it wrong or whatever, but how many people that are able to work from home actually work from home now? What sort of figure are we actually talking about, percentage-wise?
You are correct with the 30% figure with the Welsh Government reference. Their aspiration is for 30% of the workforce to be working from home. In terms of an actual number, I couldn't give you one because it's so varied. So, for example, everybody in my service comes to the building. How frequently that happens is variable, but I could put a tick in a box to say every single person will come in at some point. So it'd be really difficult to put a number on it for you. I would struggle to think of somebody who would be working from home permanently 5 days a week as a full-time employee and not coming into the building. That would be incredibly rare, if even at all. Jeff might have another comment from his perspective as another head of service on it, but yeah, I think the vast majority of people are definitely, in the building at some point.
I'm sorry about this 30%. I was trying to figure really that, a lot of our staff can't work from home, the refuse collectors and so on. So that 30% figure, what does it represent? The people that perhaps are able to work from home, or 30% of the total workforce?
It's a Welsh Government target. Their rationale for that will probably be varied. Bearing in mind they are a national, a geographical across Wales group, so they will have people they will have people who are very geographically spread out.
Yeah, on this programme again, which I was unaware of, I think people like to work from home anyway. It gives them a lot more flexibility. But there are certain areas of the the land registry and I think not social services, other parts of the government departments that actually are working from home, and because they've been instructed to actually go back, they're actually talking about taking industrial action. That's my thought around the 30% figure. Really, I'd like clarification as to exactly what are the parameters of people that do work from home.
Just before I bring Rachel back in, Jeff, is that a legacy hand, or were
No,
you
it wasn't.
waiting
It
to
was,
speak?
to be fair, Rachel invited me to join in, and I've forgotten what I was going to say, but I would just reaffirm what Rachel said. That 30% target is a Welsh Gov target on ours. I've just, I won't say specifically, I've just within the last week lost a member of my team to Welsh Government because she can exclusively, I'll get the gender away now, he or she can exclusively work from home. So they do have they do have clearly staff, and maybe that 30% figure you're talking about, and it's exclusively a home working from home jobs. There's no need for them to come into work at all. All my staff will come in or come into work. Some want to come in more often, but they will come in for team meetings. They'll come in for specific meetings when there's a face-to-face need.
Yeah, should we say, I feel perhaps, from what you've actually said, we've got control of the figures now. If we'd actually been driven down to expect people to work from home, full scale, it worries me.
Yeah, there isn't it. That's the point. There isn't.
No, okay.
But is your next point about productivity as well, Jeff?
No, I mean, I mentioned that earlier on in terms of KPIs.
No.
That's what drives our productivity.
As in sort of Councillor Jeff Jones.
Oh, sorry.
Is it a productivity related question next
Well,
one?
no, well, I started off with a productivity related question anyway. Came back to the only way we measure that at the moment is by the KPIs. So it can't be answered, shall we say? Anyway,
I just wanted to bring in a point about productivity before we move off that one if we can.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff, this is Jeff Bacon, has made an obvious point of the productivity of meetings and how things have happened. And it was almost by chance I watched Demolition Man last night, I think, and it was written in 1996 or was made there, and they were talking about people having meetings very much like Zoom. So, and a productivity of a perfect utopia going forward. So, the question I wanted to ask related to productivity was I studied under Meredith Belbin for a while and looked at productivity in teams and how people work together. And even though it's great to bring teams together, as Jeff was saying, you can do that electronically. Are there any concerns, or has there been any sort of consideration about the fact that if people are lone working, that they don't become as productive as a whole? So if you've got a KPI, KPIs measure what you already do as a rule and against you, but they don't really measure innovation as much. So, I mean, you can do innovative things to make KPIs better, but is there anything that's been looked at in innovation? Because when a team comes together, certainly, teams with different kinds of people in them, they will add to the productivity of an organisation.
So that might be a question for me to take back in terms of the transformation agenda and find out some more information perhaps. But I guess service planning is probably where I would start with that. So whilst we might have yet the KPIs around what you're doing now, actually how you improve your offer and your service comes through our service planning. And it's really important that we have obviously good governance around decision making on that, but also good monitoring. Example in my own area is the easiest one to give. So we are responsible for delivering the council's workforce strategy and coming to Scrutiny in February to talk about progress for year 2 and 3 of that, having been last year to talk about the first year. So in order to get that innovation and that change and that improvement journey, it's really important that those monitoring arrangements are robust and that we are able to demonstrate in an advisory and a support role such as HR and OD, we can do new initiatives, we can bring in X, Y and Z. That's not just the day-to-day kind of business as usual operation. And I would say that speaking on behalf of colleagues, I think we probably all have very robust monitoring performance arrangements in place, and that comes right down to the individual performance management then. So, my workforce strategy example, I will have obviously then cascaded the work from within that document down to the managers within my service, who will then in turn allocate pieces of work to their team members as well. And so collectively, we're able to then say, are we on track? Have we achieved? Have we delivered? And then what are we doing next as well to improve? So it's, for me, the service planning plus the performance management arrangements that the council has that would give evidence to say the innovation part of change and improvement is managed through that, as well as then the KPIs that show your output.
I think that'd be very interesting to see going forward, because I think that could be quite helpful to the council, because if you look at a general criticism that's made of agile working, it's sometimes that people aren't in the same room and that they don't bounce ideas off each other in the same kind of way, and that leads to innovation and things like that. So it'd be quite interesting to see how we're measuring that perhaps going forward, and how we can be innovative. You can do that in an electronic room. That's not a problem, I don't think, but it's just the sense of getting people together to discuss new ideas and new ways of sorting something out.
Yes, can I just come back and give another example there? So we have reinvigorated the senior management group. So all of the employees who are managers who report directly into a head of service, there's about 100 in total, I think. We have in-person couple of times a year get-togethers whereby we were doing exactly that. So as an example, when we met this month in January in person in this building, we were all invited to talk and share and contribute to the tackling poverty agenda, for example. So there was that, shared ownership of being able to support an area outside of your own, come at it from a different perspective, look at it through a different lens, and all feel collectively that we are one team, one Swansea, and able to contribute. So yeah, there are some live examples of where that is happening in person as well to overcome the challenge of hybrid, discouraging that.
Great. Jeff, you've got some more questions for us?
Yeah, the only last bit really, a number of organisations are now insisting that a lot of their staff actually return to the office, some for 3 days, some 4 days and so on. Do we actually keep in contact with any or keep an eye on the market as to, why they're actually going down this path?
I think it's something that's very evident to everybody. We've all got examples of either, friends, family that we know, or stories that are reported. I'm very keen to watch the Panorama programme referred to earlier tonight to see what's going on. And of course, it's an interesting topic for HR professionals to be mindful of and to be seeing what is there. Is there a big difference between private and public sector, for example? We are operating in a way that is very similar, if not pretty much identical, to all other local authorities that we are neighbours with within Wales. I'm not aware of anybody that's been particularly different to us. Everyone has had to make different decisions around their assets. And, we're in a very similar position. Civil service, slightly different in that they don't deliver services in the same way that councils do. So their workforces are probably more office-based and are able to have a higher percentage of hybrid working. And then there'll be areas in the private sector whereby they've come full circle and don't perhaps want to support hybrid working any longer. They might be tied into very long contracts for buildings for offices, and why would they want them empty perhaps? So they have staff back in. So yes, we keep a watching brief on it. And I would say at this particular moment in time where we're at, we're not out of kilter with colleagues. I see Jeff's got his hand up to comment on that.
Sorry,
Thanks, Jeff. Coming in.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, Chair. I think certainly from a local authority perspective, from my national organisation, we're very much in line with everyone else, and in lots of ways we're actually lost a bit of ground because, as I say, we were at the forefront of this, but we haven't gone as far as some of my colleagues have gone in other authorities, and the same could be said of Welsh Government as well. It's probably worth, I guess, making the point. A lot of the call to arms when it comes to getting staff back into work. Perhaps if one was being cynical, one could suggest there is a vested interest from some of the commercial property organisations that are asking their staff to come back into the office. It's not dissimilar to what we talked about earlier on with taking a presence in that city centre development. It's about confidence in our high streets and confidence in the market to make sure that the city centres don't become ghost town, and we're playing our part in that. But I think the reality is if we went to the point of insisting some of our teams, if I did to my team and said, you've all got to come to the office 5 days a week, I would probably lose half of them.
There we are. Great. Okay. Thanks very much for that, anyway.
Okay.
Jeff, anything else you'd like to raise?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions while we're here? Okay, I just wanted to thank both Rachel, Jeff, and Di for their feedback and their input in today. It's been quite an interesting discussion. What we'll probably do now is we'll probably draw into a sort of closed session where we would start to draft a letter of recommendation. Is there anything before we do that you think, from your perspectives, that we should consider including?
I think what we've got now, we've always room for improvement. But what I would say, I think it works. I think that flexible approach really, really do matter. I know the staff surveys are not always the best way of judging, because, to be honest, staff surveys, not everybody fills them in. But what I will say, it is the staff like it. It is that, and what they do like it, is that flexible part of it. So to me, I think it's no new way of working, but I think this is the way going forward. But I do believe we still got to keep that presence within the city, and that's why, as Jeff has just said, we are investing heavily in that contact centre within, and the library and archive service back within that. One thing we did miss about the civic centre site, we did discuss everything except the registrars. I believe there is a bit of work ongoing about the registrars vacating that site or staying there. So there is work being discussed at the moment, particularly with registrars, merchant deaths as well, right, on that one.
Anything that either of the officers would like to add? No. Okay. Okay, so we'll go into just thank you everyone for attending. The members of the panel and Rachel, if we'll stay on, then we'll just put some points together and draft the main points for our letter to the cabinet member. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're still going to record this section. I just double checked with Rachel. So the first thing I wanted to do is sort of draw together any opinions or any things that you think are going to be key in inclusion in the letter. Does anybody want to start with that, with any ideas, things that they'd like to see included?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we touched on is the fact that this is much larger than Swansea, in the sense that it's a national agenda and so on. And I think we need to keep an eye, or the council needs to keep an eye on the bigger picture, what is going on. And I did get a sense that they were doing from some of the, you know, the consortium working that they've got. I did get a sense that that was happening, but also beyond Wales as well, and so on. I think this is a work in progress for a lot of people, and it's evolving as we speak.
I was quite impressed to hear about how certainly in HR they're looking at most of these issues, and there seem to be a lot of things timetabled. Jeff, in the session earlier, made it a comment which was quite telling. Is he felt that we were once in the vanguard of this, and that we're maybe losing a little bit of ground. So maybe there could be some support or way in which we want to support looking at all the innovations that have happened elsewhere and what could be useful for us to adopt here. So I think there are ways in which we could maybe take this further or differently from what's there. So how do people feel about that?
Yeah, I agree, really. You know what I mean? You know, what's been said, you know, we do need to keep an eye on this. I was impressed when she actually said that, shall we say, the terms of employment, you know, would include flexibility, shall we say. You know, it doesn't mean to say that if you work from home for 5 days now, it doesn't mean to say that in 6 months' time you're going to work from home 3 days or not work from home at all. So I think that's a major point, actually. You know, we need to keep control of this.
I think you're right. Communications are absolutely key there. I mean, knowing a little bit of employment law in terms of contractual law, the principal workplace, it sounds like it's establishing everyone's contract as being their main work site rather than being at home. So that will be of an advantage if things need to change in the future. But I mean, from the soft side of things, people will get used to certain things, and that's why I'm raised custom and practice. People will be under the view that I've done this for some time now. I want to continue to do this, and it's about managing expectations as much as anything else, I think, because if you change something back, people may leave or people may become unproductive because they believe that they're not getting the fair rights that they feel that they should have. I think that's a key area. In terms of one area that I was interested in, and I think it's probably a bit wider than this, is that I couldn't quite grasp the rationale of the accommodation strategy, because city centre would usually be customer contacting, and from what I believe earlier was said, is that a lot of those people in the department, which is going to be accommodated within the new building, were people who work from home primarily anyway. So I think we just need a little bit of clarity about the accommodation strategy, because there seems to be 3 or 4 different competing priorities. One is keeping people in the city centre, which has logic to itself. You know, having people in the city centre, they potentially buy things, they do things, it breeds people in. The second one is to, you know, the other rationale is to reduce the amount of accommodation you have because it involves costs. And also, if you're bringing people in who can work from home, you're adding to the pressure on the roads and the environment. And the third one then is, if it's, why are we putting the most back office group in a brand new building where, you know, I'm not saying that they don't deserve a brand new building, but if you're thinking about that being a public sector hub, which suggests to me people working together or people, there doesn't seem to be much logic to it. That's my personal view, obviously, but I'm sure that there'll be other opinions on that. So I would suppose maybe suggest that we put in the letter that there needs to be a little bit more clarification about the accommodation strategy and the balance between having people remain in buildings and the benefits of reducing the overall estate. So I think that would probably be worth putting in there as a point. How do people feel about the welfare side of things and the amount of work that's been done to ensure the pastoral well-being of staff? Any points that people want to raise there?
Well, I think it needs to be continually considered. You know, we're moving into a new area as such. You know, we don't really know. I know working from home for some people has been done for donkey's years, you know, but for, shall we say, the mass workforce, it may be different. You know, one thing, going back to this panorama program, really they're actually saying that perhaps working from home for 5 days is not a good thing because you lose, you know, touch, you know, with people in the office and so on. So as long as it's continually monitored and we go through a learning curve on this, yeah.
I think do you want to come in, Sandra? Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think an area of concern for me is the middle managers who are line managing people, and it depends on their circumstances. So, for example, the middle manager could be line managing some young people new to the workforce and so on, and perhaps need to give them a little bit more face-to-face time. But equally, that middle manager has got at the moment just as much right to work from home. And there is a little bit of a tension there. To go on to another environment might be, for example, waste or cleansing. Middle managers really need to be there in order to, because a lot of their staff are front facing on the ground, working every day and certainly not from home. So it's a very difficult one for those middle managers to balance. You know, we can't actually, and I wouldn't suggest we'd imply that they have to work from the office all the time, but equally, are they impacting on the people they line manage by not being there 5 days a week? And I don't know the answer to that. It just concerns me.
So I think a way to capture that, maybe, Sandra, would be to say that we'd like to make sure or sure that they're continually considering the arrangements for induction new staff or for line management, so that they're keeping the pastoral contact. I think my concern is that people become distanced. And people who work continually lone working, it's well shown that that's not good for either their well-being or for their productivity. I mean, I've seen this not in all roles, but some roles, especially where innovation and creativity is involved, being groups of people matters. You know, so and I do know that there are anecdotal evidence of people being substantially away for long periods of time from an office or other environments currently. So obviously I wouldn't want to mention names or anything like that, but I think there's something a bit of work that probably needs to be done there from the pastoral side of things. Anything else that people feel that we should label in the letter as an issue?
Can I just come in again on what we've just been talking about? Because the reason why I thought of the question about can different departments decide their own plan is partly in line with what we've just been saying. The whole point is a department are on a far better position to decide what's best for the staff they've got and the purpose of what that department's about. Maybe if you're going to put something in the letter, ask perhaps for clarification that these concerns that we've just been saying are addressed enough or considered. But I think that was the whole point of me asking this, that what I didn't want is for agile working to be the same size fits across the whole council, because I don't think that will work. And from what I got, I felt reassured that that wasn't the case. So I felt fairly reassured that some of this had been addressed. So if we are going to say something, I think we need to acknowledge that at least.
I think you're also right in the general principle, Leslie, of this is that we don't need a top-down approach that we try to get everyone to fit into. We need something that's going to work productively for the services themselves and potentially for the individuals involved. I think it's just making sure that they're, as you said, it's working quite well, but those considerations are always kept fresh in people's minds, isn't it? Okay, Rachel, do you think there's anything that we discussed today that we haven't really covered? Anything that came new?
Don't think so. I've made quite a lot of points of note, notes from your points that you've made. I think you've got a couple of recommendations there about keeping an eye on things and not a sort of one size fits all approach, or just a regular monitoring approach to a lot of things has come up in a few places. Request for some more case studies. So there's a couple of information feedback points as well.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. I think as well, what I'd like to do is if we draft a letter together,
Yep.
and then if I circulate it, including to Beth and the other members of the panel that couldn't make it today, and Angela, to make sure that if they've got any feedback and if anything comes up from the stuff that's circulated via Rachel Davis, that is, of the different work areas, then I think we can try to look to incorporate that into letter and get something drafted over the next couple of weeks or so.
Yep.
Is there anything else that people would like to raise at this point? Okay, I just want to thank everyone for their contribution, and let's all watch Panorama, shall we? And see if there's anything else that we want to add in from there. It seems that Jess, you got to watch it on iPlayer, I take it.
I did. Well, it was Mary actually pointed it out. She said, there's something on tonight with Panorama with regard to Agile working. So I've never watched anything like that before. But I hope it comes up to expectations. It certainly gives viewpoints. Of course, you've got the, shall we say, the business side. People like to work from home. It gives people a lot more flexibility and so on. It's how at the end of the day, how it affects them and how it affects the business at the end of the day. Anyway, have a look and see what you think.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I'll just bring the meeting to a close then. Okay, thanks very much for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Ta-ra.